Good afternoon, and may the force be with you. Now, I'm Audrey Quek, I'm from the Straits Times, and I didn't wander off from a Star Wars convention. And I'm not exactly a Star Wars fan, so why am I mentioning this? That I'm sure, like me, most of you would have heard that Jedi Greeting. It is about the power of language and how it gets, from a slogan in a movie, gets embedded into popular culture, captures the imagination. Now, the Jedi phrase is part of marketing. And marketers and advertisers have long known about the power of language, right? Coke is the real thing. They don't have the tag Pepsi, but they brand themselves as the better thing. So it's good that you buy Coke rather than Coca-Cola instead of Pepsi. And then you have, Nike's, just do it. Now, all marketers have, no matter what slogan they use, as their aim to get you to buy stuff. More soft drinks, more shoes, more plastic lightsabers. But in politics, the aim is a bit different. Although you could say that ultimately, they are also trying to get you to buy things, to sell you their candidates, to sell sometimes an idea or ideals, and they use the same devices, right? So you have catchy soundbites like, "Make America Great Again." Yes, you can. These are all, taken quite easily from, the toolkits of advertisers of commercial merchandise. Yeah. So, but of course, it's more complicated than that for politics, because instead of a direct sell, sometimes politicians use language to unite and sometimes to divide, us versus them. And that is part of the attraction of populists, this division between you and, us and them. So, and sometimes they use dog whistles. They don't come out overtly. They use an image and let it speak to itself. Language is more than just words. It's gestures, it's images. So it's a very complex subject, and I'm very, very happy today to have three speakers who would look into different facets of this phenomenon of how language is used to induce emotions in voters and the general public. We have two presentations. I'll do a general introduction first. First, we have Professor Uday Privet. She will talk about how this is not really a new phenomenon. It goes back all the way to ancient Greece, to the days of the Peloponnesian Wars, and how it's worked out since. And following her, we have a different speaker who will talk about how it works in Switzerland, right? Heike Scholten, she's an expert on that. And she will tell you a bit more about how it happens on the ground. And then we'll have a panel discussion with our third speaker, Astrid Langer. And after that, we'll throw it open to the floor. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Privet to give her presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey.
Thank
you. Well, populism. Populism, as it is witnessed in contemporary politics, and as we have tried to define it here in many sessions before, populism seems to have a particular and peculiar association with emotions. At least this is what we are told by journalists who cover the phenomenon on a day-to-day basis, and by social scientists who study it from some distance. Emotions, so the argument goes, are put center stage in populist appeals, and this is what allegedly distinguishes such appeals from the practices of more rationally minded political parties and movements. In my talk, I will examine this argument somewhat more closely, and I will do so apologize? No, I don't apologize. From the perspective of the historian who sees contemporary events through a historical lens. Whenever something happens that draws people's attention and is deemed to revolutionize affairs and worldviews, historians tend to sit back and ask, what's really new about it? This strategy has a double effect. It tends to deflate seemingly dramatic situations and thus helps us to understand their very specifics. Let me introduce 5 short arguments. First, the relationship between politics and emotions is not a new subject. As far back as classical Athens, both practitioners and theoreticians have had a clear grasp of how deeply the two were connected. Aristotle wrote about how an orator with the use of certain rhetorical strategies could lead his audience to feel certain emotions that would then prove crucial in promoting certain political ends. As Thucydides tells us, Pericles had learned this lesson very well. In his funeral oration at the end of the first year of the Peloponnesian War, he expertly managed to praise the dead who had sacrificed their lives to defend Athenian values, while at the same time inspiring the living to continue the task. More than 2,000 years later, Abraham Lincoln, in his Gettysburg Address, used a similar rhetoric to honor the fallen soldiers, hearten the remaining fighters, and recruit new followers for the noble cause. Ancient Athens and the modern US were both classified as democracies, as political systems that depended on the rule of the people instead of an elite or a tyrant. People's rule demanded different strategies to mobilize support, approval, and consent and cooperation compared with tyranny or absolutism. Democracies depended on people's consent, and this consent had to be won and secured by those who had been chosen temporarily as leaders. Apart from financial bribery, moral and emotional appeals served that end. Second, let us explore more closely the nature of emotional appeals that are at work in modern democratic politics. A major issue is trust. Trust between those who govern and those who are governed. In pre-democratic times, trust was preceded by loyalty. Loyalty that the subjects owed to the monarch, who was to repay their loyalty by protecting them against foreign enemies and internal strife and hardship. Such loyalty was thought to be a given and supposedly could not be broken until French citizens saw their king fleeing the country and in turn had him guillotined. Trust thereafter became the paradigmatic democratic emotion. The king trusted the people by sharing his power with them. The people trusted their king and government, but only for a limited period, after which they could withdraw their trust and vote in a different government. Trust thus became a major bargaining issue. In democratic politics, politicians who were thought to represent the people had to prove that they had earned the people's trust by keeping their promises and behaving in a way that satisfied their voters' moral and material expectations, not just material, as we were just told in this morning's panel discussion. At the same time, voters were free to withdraw trust and hold their representatives accountable. At least in theory, the people and those whom they sent into parliament were bound by reciprocal trust and the proof of trustworthiness. In practice, and from very early on, politicians tried to secure the people's trust by employing emotional mobilization and identification. Mobilizing citizens required the use of emotions as means to raise interest and provoke action. It also meant creating a specific language that served those ends. Socialist parties during the 19th century were the first to do so by using two major mechanisms that we can still recognize in today's politics: inclusion and exclusion. Inclusion meant to homogenize their political constituency, the working classes, by encouraging their participation in a dense network of associations from cradle to grave, with their own media and communication channels. Exclusion was tantamount to clarifying who the enemy was: capitalists, the state, conservative parties, conservative journalists. Both inclusion and exclusion were charged with heavy emotional baggage. Inclusion drew upon the powerful concept, newly invented, of solidarity. Exclusion was achieved through a highly emotionalized language and image of cruel, exploitative entrepreneurs and an oppressive police state that supported them. Third, such strategies of inclusion and exclusion set the tone for a number of changes during the 20th century. You see, I'm moving very fast from ancient Greece to our own times, don't worry. So mainly during the 20th century, we see the emergence of so-called people's parties. In my country, as well as in other parts of Western Europe, we tend to associate this development with post-World War II societies, where both social democrats and Christian conservatives, Konrad Adenauer, reinvented themselves as parties catering to all voters, instead of neatly defined social or religious milieus. But in fact, the first real People's Party was the National Socialist Party, despite its very name that seemed to address only workers. The claim to include and represent the whole German people, regardless of class, religion, gender, or regional traditions, went along with a massive appeal to unity and empathy. Concepts of national honor and duty played a huge role in reminding citizens of what was at stake: the awakening of the people and its struggle for perseverance and resurrection. Enemies were found both internally and externally, as racial others, like Jews, and as those who, after World War I, wanted to subdue Germany forever. This strategy was supplemented by a strong emotional bond between the people and its leader. Such bond had been known to exist during the monarchy, between kings or emperors and their subjects. Hitler, however, Adolf Hitler, did not consider his role to belong to this tradition, but invented his own. As a popular leader whose social origins and upbringing connected him to the people, and who thus knew exactly what the people wanted and needed. He allegedly spoke the people's language and expressed what they felt: fear of communism, disdain against liberalism and plutocracy, antipathy towards the Jews, contempt for those who undermined the physical and moral strength of the nation. National Socialism was not the only political movement that was supposed to represent the people and its intimate relationship with an uncontested leader. Communism, as it developed in Soviet Russia, was another case in point. After the Bolshevik Revolution, which we kind of celebrate this year, kind of in a centenary celebration. The triumphant proletariat and its avant-garde, the Communist Party, generously accepted members of other social origins into their ranks and exterminated those who did not fit in. Logically, no political competitors were allowed. Internal unity was fostered through a veritable cult of personality, first focusing on Lenin, then with even more vigor on Stalin. The latter was staged as a father figure, similar to the former Tsars, for all citizens, demanding trust, or actually rather loyalty, obedience, devotion, and in turn granting security and promising happiness. Mass rallies and a constant presence of audio media like the radio tried to maintain the revolutionary momentum and raised the level of emotional appeal and collective arousal. Neither Soviet Russia nor fascist Germany actually needed positive emotions to win the support of the voters in parliamentary elections because there were no parliamentary elections. Both could have relied on politics of fear, terror, and repression that were put in place right from the beginning. But they were both keen on presenting their regimes as based on people's consent and surrounded by people's love. On the one hand, they followed Machiavelli's advice that it's better and more efficient to rule through love than through fear. On the other hand, they wanted to impress liberal democracies and confront them with a superior political model. Ultimately, and this is my fourth point, liberal democracy won, first over fascism, then over Soviet communism. The war against fascism was fierce and hot, and there was a place for all sorts of emotions, with the exception of fear, which was deemed counterproductive and detrimental to the war effort. In order to stir up the spirit of resistance, both Great Britain and the US invoked positive emotions like patriotism and a deeply felt commitment to liberal democratic values. Political leaders were depicted as standing side by side with their people, united by mutual trust and a common goal. Victory was celebrated as an emotional moment of the highest intensity. The numerous iconic photographs, now I actually regret not having a PowerPoint at hand, but you probably all know them. The photographs taken in 1945 both reveal and memorize those emotions. In many ways, however, unity and homogeneity are not elements characteristic of modern liberal societies and politics. Instead, difference and heterogeneity are firmly inscribed into parliamentary democracy, with several parties competing for votes and power. Unsurprisingly, the post-war period again witnessed deep ideological fractures and conflicts of interest, expressed in an emotional language that included distinctions such as friends and foes, us and them. But the trend to reach out to all strata of society, which nowadays is called the center, die Mitte, had a curious effect. As party programs were now bound to be inclusive and embrace various interests, they largely lost their radical edge. In this situation, political personalities gained momentum. Since the 1960s, the personalization of politics has been a dominant feature, supported by increasing and ever-present media coverage, because, of course, the media finds it much more juicy to report on personalities than on party programs. Personalization, in turn, invited further emotionalization, even if politicians, and not everybody did that, tried to balance emotional appeals and factual arguments, they inevitably became the targets of emotional identification or resentment. Willy Brandt is a famous example in West German politics. How does this relate to what we are currently witnessing, the rise of right-wing populism and its tendency to re-radicalize politics, intensify the divide between friend and foe, and seemingly put emotions center stage? My fifth and last argument goes as follows. The new brand of populism has, on the one hand, a lot to share with traditional politics in democratic societies, such as the claim to represent the people, defined both politically and socially. It deliberately aims to abandon the extremes of the political spectrum, occupied by former right-wingers like the neo-Nazis in Germany or the Jean-Marie Le Pen tradition in the French Front National. They want to leave that niche and reach out to the center. Nevertheless, this brand of populism diverges from mainstream politics by first promoting single and one-dimensional solutions for complex problems like globalization, Europeanization, migration. Second, it defines the elites as their main opponent, claiming that these elites, mislead and deceive the people, cater to their own isolated interests, and ignore the true concerns of the majority. Third, they pretend to give that majority an emotional voice, thus using emotions as a political argument. This is far from what we mean when we talk about the emotionalization of politics. What takes place should rather be referred to as the politicization or political empowerment of emotions. I feel neglected by mainstream politics. I feel disregarded by the arrogant elite. I feel threatened by criminal foreigners, even though statistics tell a different story. These kind of emotional utterances that we've seen both with Newt Gingrich, but also with West German politicians and many others, these kind of emotional utterances have come to be considered as crucial and legitimate, and I would like to stress and emphasize that, legitimate resources of political communication. Instead of tampering them down or pushing them aside by so-called rational information and debate, they are applauded as tokens of authenticity, and that's a term that we should not dismiss or disregard here. It was actually mentioned this morning by Vincent Harris, who said that his allegiance to President Trump really builds on the notion of authenticity that this would-be politician actually conveys, for him at least. So emotions are applauded as tokens of authenticity, urgency, and truthfulness. Emotions, it is claimed by those who press the issue, emotions always speak the truth, while rationality, favored by the elite, is frowned upon as instrumental and manipulative, as faked. The argument itself, that emotions always speak the truth, is not altogether far-fetched. Our current culture is soaked with emotions. And again, I could have shown you many examples. Audrey actually referred to them when she talked about advertisement commercials that constantly appeal, they want to sell us something, and they sell us something, and that's a pretty new development, starting around 2000, They appeal to our purse, so to speak, through our hearts. They go through our hearts. They directly appeal to our emotions. Sometimes they're only these goods that are supposed to be sold, like cars or cosmetics or even cat food. They just simply call emotion, as simple as it is. So emotion, just maybe I have this déformation professionnelle now that I see emotions everywhere, but just go with open eyes, look at billboards, look at how goods and services are being sold. They directly target emotions, and that's a new development. So advertisement makes use of emotions, and also public discourse. Just look at, again, not just about in politics, but also in marketing of services like banks or insurance companies. The notion of trust is omnipresent. You enter Zurich Airport and they say, well, trust is the most important thing. Of course, who says it? A private bank. Another emotion that is highly, or stands in high regard nowadays is empathy. Everybody talks about empathy. I've kind of followed Porsche campaigns, and there are private clubs of Porsche drivers, not connected to the company. That, and when you go to their website, they have sentences like, join us, our members are behaving towards each other in complete empathy, and that's even highlighted on their website. And I thought, how does empathy actually enter the website of a private Porsche club? It's just everywhere. There are certain emotions or emotion words that creep through every little, or into every little pocket or big pocket of our societies. So against this background, adopting emotions as a political medium seems quasi-natural, although it's not. It would be misleading, though, to think of emotions as a given. It's just, being there. People have emotions. People feel resentment. And then political parties, or especially populist parties, just pick them up and mirror them. That's also something that's been alluded to in this morning's first panel session. And that's altogether wrong, because populism applies a lot of effort, and very concerted effort, on evoking and cultivating such emotions, especially resentment. Political speeches generally use strong language that is supposed to elicit and fuel the desired emotions. The more you hear about your legitimate hatred against the elites, the more you feel that hatred, the more you allow yourself to feel that hatred. The more your leaders emphatically address you as the people, you are the people, not them, the more you feel like the people. Emotional language, uttered by an emotional voice and accompanied by emotionalizing imagery, does not just express or mirror emotions, it also, and even more so, produces emotions. Of course, this is true of every political movement. Yet, whereas mainstream parties tend to carefully balance such emotion work, right-wing populism does exactly the opposite. Not the same, but the opposite. They whip up emotions rather than mirror them, mostly actually negative emotions, hatred against the other, with a special take, and I really want to emphasize what's been said yesterday, with a special take against women, even though some women also serve on the boards or are high officials in these parties, as Marine Le Pen and Alice Weidel. But they're also strong, populist politics, they're also strong on positive emotions, such as pride, empathy, solidarity, which are reserved, however, for those who belong and deliberately exclude those who don't. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for a very exhaustive, it's a very thought-provoking presentation. Next, we have Heike, who will tell us, on Switzerland and how they go about voting in direct referendums. Yeah, thanks.
I bring with some slides and billboards from campaigns in Switzerland who were very emotional. Ladies and gentlemen, the changing style of political communication and media in political circles, decisions such as Brexit, the election of Donald Trump, or the acceptance of the federal popular initiative Stop Mass Immigration in Switzerland, which I will address later, are just a few examples that have sparked concern over the public mood, fear of the specter of populism is abroad. According to the Global Future Survey by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, populism is even the world's #1 threat to stability. We observe how enraged citizens vent their feelings in spirals of shouting in social networks, while many opinion leaders prefer to retreat into spirals of silence, for fear of being publicly decried for their positions. The resounding public echo of German Chancellor Angela Merkel's words, in German, wir schaffen das, in English, we can do it, elicits empathy for the choice of strategy of silence. But I am ultimately convinced that silence is the wrong way to go about getting rid of the dreaded specter. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to be here today and to be able to discuss with you the power of language and emotions as one tool of populism. I thank the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for enabling us to have this discussion. For about the next 20 minutes, I would like to share with you my views on this important topic, based on my practical experiences as a campaigner on the applied and on the applied research we conduct into language and society through our lab of Gentinetta Scholten. The acceptance by a very narrow margin of the popular initiative Stop Mass Immigration was a shock for Switzerland, just like the worldwide shock caused by the election of Donald Trump. Hardly anyone had thought it possible, yet it happened. A wafer-thin majority voted for the drastic curtailment of immigration to Switzerland. The establishment and much of the population were shocked. How could the normally reasonable Swiss population approve a right-wing conservative initiative, one that endangers Switzerland's entire Europe policy founded on the bilateral approach by departing from the existing EU arrangement on immigration? Quite a commotion was caused in Germany by the statement, "What one feels is also reality." In German, das, was man fühlt, ist auch Realität, from a leading candidate for the right-wing conservative party Alternative für Deutschland. Naturally, such words from the mouth of a politician only further inflamed the ever more heated discussion about fake news, alternative facts, and post-truth politics. The statement made it abundantly clear that in politics, when it comes to clarifying the question of power, is not just the facts that count, but also the ability to exploit people's emotional states. Let us take a moment to reflect on the title of the Swiss popular initiative, Stop Mass Immigration. We can feel the power of the language as a tool for tapping into exploiting these emotional states. With a resident population of 8.5 million, a foreigner component of under 25%, about 1/5 of whom were born and raised in Switzerland but not naturalized, and average annual population growth of 1%, the title of the initiative alone clearly exaggerates the reality. For it suggests that Switzerland is being flooded by foreigners. In terms of language, this evokes the water metaphor, the mechanics of which are well known by now, given the ongoing discussion about refugees in Europe. If we accept the definition of populism as opportunistic, down-to-earth, often demagogic politics designed to win the favor of the masses by dramatizing the political situation, the 50% yes votes can certainly be regarded as a victory for the populists. But who are these populists in Switzerland? It's the Swiss People's Party, the SVP. For decades now, Switzerland has known the kind of populism that is currently being discussed worldwide. The natural conservative right-wing populist and economically liberal party is known for radical and simple recipes for solving complex problems, for its deliberate breaking of taboos, its provocations, and for railing against those at the top. If the People's Party wants to adopt the "We at the People" slogan, here you see the political system of Switzerland. It's really a complex system, and I can't explain it now. But I will talk about this part in red. It's the direct democracy. So, if the Swiss People's Party wants to adopt "We are the people" slogan, it does not need to request the political right to do so. In Switzerland, referendums are an integral part of the political system. We distinguish between popular initiatives and referendums. Through a popular initiative, the people can introduce ideas into the political process. In a referendum, voters decide on a law already approved by the government and the parliament. As the guardian of Swiss independence, the Swiss People's Party wants to protect the country's neutrality, it's very important to Switzerland, and consistently advocates for a restrictive immigration policy. To constantly prove the public and to its voters that party does not merely talk the talk, but also walks the political walk, party strategists have been skillfully and proactively using the tools of the direct democracy for years now. Their preferred terrain is Switzerland's policy on Europe and immigration. The party has single-handedly mounted referendums against joining the European Economic Area, against Switzerland's entry into the Schengen area, and repeatedly against the agreement with the EU on the free movement of persons. In parallel to these referendums, numerous anti-EU and anti-foreigner initiatives have been launched. The exploitation of political issues for party political power politics is part of the success story of the SVP. You will see it on the table over there. Still the smallest political force in the 1990s, with round about 12%. It is now the strongest party in the Swiss parliament with just under 30%. How did they do it? They attract attention through provocation and scandal. And they have a terrifying communication style. I bring with me this poster. This provocative poster campaign was deployed in public spaces in the 2011 election year. It was the SVP campaign to collect the 100,000 signatures required for the popular initiative Stop Mass Immigration to take place. This poster is representative and numerous others and illustrates the party's political style. The visual imagery is provocative and defamatory. The slogans bear the typical hallmarks of right-wing populist language. It uses verbs that evoke conflict, such as condemn, criticize, or defame, intensifiers, such as absolute, totally, completely, or profoundly, words that shock, such as ruin or destroy, or buzzwords like mass naturalization, poisonous, or mass immigration. The Swiss People's Party has repeatedly used such tactics of bluster to provoke a public outcry and thereby attract mass attention to itself. This has often had the effect, like the case of Donald Trump, of diverting attention from the real political discourse and starting a discussion about a player style of political communication. The victory of the Stop Mass Immigration initiative at the polls 3 years later in 2014 was the second major victory for the Swiss People's Party against Switzerland's policy on Europe. Already in 1992, it was a campaign by the Swiss People's Party that prevented Switzerland from joining the European Economic Area. That no vote leads Switzerland in subsequent years to adopt the bilateral approach to its policy towards Europe. What this means in practice is that Switzerland, as a non-member state but geographically located in the heart of the European continent, has had to work individual bilateral agreements with the EU to manage its relations with neighboring countries and hence with its most important trading partners. The Swiss voters clearly support this political path. The key features of this arrangement with the EU is that the individual agreements are all interrelated. This means that if Switzerland wishes to denounce one agreement, all the others can be terminated at the same time. This also includes the agreement on the free movement of persons, which regulates migration to Switzerland from EU member states. This is a thorn in the side of the Swiss People's Party. And they took every opportunity to call for a referendum when there were new bilateral negotiations with the EU, for example, as a result of the eastward expansion of the EU. In my then position as Deputy Communication Officer and campaigner at Economy Suisse, the umbrella organization of the Swiss business sector and one of the major campaign leaders in Switzerland's direct democracy, I spearheaded their voting campaign. And I'll tell you, we fought the SVP with the similar arms. As we all know, democratic politics is subject to approval and therefore needs justification. Communication, therefore, becomes the central means of legitimation. Politics, communication, and language is the key medium for structuring and transmitting politics. Anyone hoping to accomplish anything in politics in a democracy, anyone wishing to push through specific interests in a pluralistic system must get to the heart of the matter and elicit a response. So it was only the populists in question who therefore needed to blow their own trumpet in order to be heard in a modern mass media democracy with its own rules of attention seeking. So did we. With every referendum by the Swiss People's Party, we knew that if we ventured into the terrain of immigration with our messaging, things would be problematic. We therefore devised a campaign strategy that enabled us to put the focus not on the agreement on the free movement of persons, but on the bilateral agreements as an overall package that would be jeopardized by a no vote from Swiss people. In red, you see the translation of the text, of the messages and arguments. These are the tried and tested bilaterals. It was a winning strategy to us for several years against the SVP. The keywords used consistently over several years were the bilaterals. Stylistically, the image consisted of a cut-out-like silhouette of a tree, which would thrive and bear fruit if the bilateral approach and hence all the agreements were maintained, but which would wither away if the bilateral path was abandoned. In one word, the bilateral way symbolizes wealth and prosperity in Switzerland. Our framing strategy worked until it came to the vote on the Stop Mass Immigration initiative, because implementing the Swiss People's Party initiative is not compatible with the Switzerland-EU agreement on the free movement of persons. The initiative represented yet another attack on Switzerland's bilateral approach. In its campaign, the private sector again resorted to its tried and tested frame, the bilaterals, but it lost the battle. While it had been possible in past years to focus not just the campaign itself on the bilaterals, but through the campaign also the public debate, this approach failed in 2014. Why? Because other frames developed more power in 2014, like the mass frame with the keyword mass immigration, or the container frame with the keyword density stress, in German dichte Stress. Both of them touched a nerve. What is a frame? A frame is a thought pattern in interpretative framework, a mental structure. Frames are activated in our brain by language. Frames are selective, they therefore highlight certain facts and realities while blocking out others. When it comes to political thinking, this means that by activating frames, certain ideological facts are highlighted and others are not. For political communication, it is crucial to be aware of the characteristics of frames. If a frame is negated, for example, it is still activated. And the use of certain concepts reinforce frames corresponding to it and hence our thinking. Frames are activated specifically by the use of keywords. They condense particular viewpoints and perspectives into a word or a slogan, mass immigration and density stress, which in other words mean being overrun by foreigners and having no more space in one's own country. In its follow-up campaign, the private sector overlooked the fact that the people were voting on a popular initiative whose title already contained the powerful frames mass and water. The frame connects to and reinforces exciting fears and negative feelings. The keywords density stress, which were introduced into the debate by a leading daily newspaper, added more fuel to the fire. Density stress encapsulated and expressed what many citizens find irritating on a daily basis: congested streets, overcrowded public transport, ever more limited living space and rising rentals in urban centers, not least of all owing to the growing numbers of foreigners residing in Switzerland. The bilateral agreements have indeed been a powerful boost to the Swiss economy and have therefore created countless jobs in the country that could not have been filled by the local workforce. Yes, yet this time, discontent over the less desirable side effects was stronger. Switzerland is in a dilemma. Various economic associations, including my former employer Economy Swiss, which I left in the year 2009, commissioned Gentinetta Scholten in the wake of the defeat to conduct an ex post facto analysis. They wanted to know why they failed to get their story across. We mounted a large-scale discourse analysis project and were able to show that Swiss citizens have no emotional connection with the bilateral agreements. Our analysis of 20 group conversations, which we conducted all across the country in all 3 national languages, has revealed the dilemma in which Switzerland finds itself. The bilateral agreements facilitate immigration. This leads to population growth. For the most part, population growth is perceived emotionally and negatively. This perception endangers acceptance of the bilateral agreements, which in general do indeed bring prosperity. This prosperity is not being perceived consciously at the personal level. However, the result is greater receptiveness to simple slogans that tap into the mood of the times. Times in which the gains of globalization are destabilizing people not only in Switzerland but also elsewhere. Switzerland voters said yes to the Stop Mass Immigration initiative, but only shortly thereafter the Swiss People's Party was again defeated at the polls when they attempted to tighten even further their restrictive policy on foreigners. Barack Obama won the presidential election with the slogan, "Yes, we can," and Donald Trump 8 years later with "Make America Great Again." The times are changing. They are marked by discontinuity. What does remain constant for politics, however, is that message must get through to the people and must also be understood by voters. Clear language, simplification, speaking to people's feelings, these are part and parcel of the business of politics. There is no such thing as politics without emotions. Besides, there is basically nothing wrong with effectively packaging positions and programs that include proposed solutions to problems affecting our daily lives, and in so doing, capturing the mood of the times. The aims pursued by a political player in a democratic system marked by pluralism, diversity of opinions, and openness is another matter, however. What does remain true is that language is a powerful tool that can be cleverly used to tap into the state of mind of nations so as to reinforce their leaning in one direction or another. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we go to the panel discussion segment of this talk. May I invite Astrid Langer to join us? Since she's new, I'm going to pose the first question to her. But I'd like to make a quick roundup of some of the observations made. We talked about the element of trust, and there's also the need to connect. Somehow, when the connection fails, there's a lack of trust, and and as a result, whoever is on the losing end also doesn't get the votes. Now, I'd like to raise another point, especially in regard to populist rhetoric. In 2008, a professor, now with NUS, published a book called The Anti-Intellectualization of the US Presidency. The book, what he did, his research was to look at all the speeches, the inauguration speeches, and the State of Union speeches of US presidents from George Washington to George W. Bush. And he subjected all these speeches to what they call the Flash Readability Index, that measures how complex or simple a sentence is. The fewer the words, the fewer the syllables, the simpler. And it was quite fascinating because it found that over the years, presidential speeches got simpler and simpler. When it came to Obama's time, the presidential speeches were pitched at 6th to 8th grade comprehension levels of students in school. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address was around 11, right? And his book stopped at George W. Bush, but other people followed up after Trump came along. And they found that it went down to 4th grade primary school level. The minimalist, beautiful, sad, bad, right? So, and if you look at the 2016 election, he's pitted against Hillary Clinton, who spoke in complete sentences. So how did a man with such limited vocabulary win the election? So I'd like to ask Astrid to tell us a bit more of her observations of the US presidential election and unravel the mystery for us. Astrid.
You're basically saying that Hillary Clinton was too smart for the American people in 2016. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about that. What I do know, however, is that I think that Donald Trump was, although he wasn't very strong on the language side, let's say, he is very strong on the emotional side. So coming back to the slogan that Mrs. Scholten just had in her presentation, does any one of you know what Hillary Clinton's slogan was in 2016? I'm with her was one of them. It was actually Stronger Together. I heard that somewhere. But the fact that out of 20, 30 people, one person remembers, I think that shows pretty impressively that the slogan didn't really work. I had the same experience myself. I got the chance to be in Florida 3 months prior to the election last year. Florida is a very important swing state, as you probably know. And being there as a reporter, I tried to go to rallies of the candidates, right? So neither one of the two leading candidates happened to be in the state when I was there, but I just wanted to go to a fundraiser. So I went on their respective websites, and there were several events for Hillary Clinton. I went there, but I was the only person. Nobody else showed up for the meeting places. So after the first try, I figured I was maybe too late or too early or I don't know what. So I went to a second event, and again, nobody showed up. And then I went to one supposed Trump rally of Cuban Americans in Miami. And there were hundreds of people. And believe me, one thing, they were fired up. And I think that Trump managed to do something that Hillary Clinton didn't do at all. He managed to get people emotionally engaged. And he did so because of the things he said, but he's also a master in firing up crowds. If he were here right now, he would just come to the speaker's position and go, USA, USA, and he would go like that for like 5 minutes. Actually, he would get one of his supporters, Stephen Miller, who's a speechwriter for him right now. He used to have the position of firing up the crowds at Trump rallies. So he would go out first, get the crowd fired up. Then Trump would come on stage, just yell USA, USA, interact with the crowd, ask them questions. Right? Yes? Do you agree? And then sometimes it was amazing. He would just go, USA in between, and you're like, what the hell is going on? I mean, this is a rally, and you're supposed to talk about your political perspective and vision of the US, and you're just chanting slogans. But that's something that he succeeded in getting people emotionally involved. And I think that's an aspect that Hillary Clinton managed to accomplish. In fact, I think the only thing that she managed to do emotionally was getting people negatively involved. So there was the term, I vote ABC in 2016. Anything but Clinton was actually an abbreviation. There wasn't anything but Trump. ABT was not a thing in 2016. So I'm just giving you these examples to show you that although we perceive Hillary Clinton, and it's not only a question of perception, I believe. I mean, she was the so much more qualified candidate. But still, on an emotional level, she didn't interact and connect with the people. And I think that was a huge problem for her last year.
Thank you. Any observations from the panel?
I agree, but we shouldn't forget about Bernie Sanders, who on the Democratic side played exactly the same, well, not the same card, but a similar card. He really got people emotionally worked up. We might wonder, however, why such a candidate, who had been very strong but eventually had to cede, did not transfer his emotional support to Hillary Clinton, which would have been possible, And I do think that this has something to do not just with this kind of more retracted style of hers, you know, more, well, she's not a yeller. She definitely is not a yeller, fortunately so. And that she's a female person. And that really kept many, many, many people away from her. And I would not kind of, apart from reaching out to the people and having an emotional voice and tone, etc., I would not tend to disregard the fact that America was not ripe for a female leader at this moment. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very important point. And till this day, it often, as a woman, it still aggravates me that a candidate who was so clearly better qualified, again, lost again against a man. At the same time, not any man, yeah. But at the same time, what strikes me is that, in my opinion, Hillary Clinton and Angela Merkel are very comparable in many ways. In the experience they have, in the way that they compose themselves on stage. And I think it's very interesting to see how Angela Merkel is very successful as a female world leader these days, whereas Hillary Clinton was not. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that, because that's something that strikes me.
Yes, it is an observation that I think struck a lot of people because, I mean, she's been accused of boring people to death, right, in her speeches. Oh yeah, well, yeah, a bit exaggerated. And, you know, she makes this cryptic diamond gesture. Not sure why she does that. But she has run Germany for 12 years now. So is it to do with personality, having the right personality to, you know, interact with the right political culture? Can she succeed, let's say, in the US, minus the misogyny? Yeah.
I've been asked this question, what actually distinguishes Hillary Clinton from Angela Merkel or the other way around, especially by New York Times journalists who will write many articles on Angela Merkel because they are sure that she will win, everybody is. And one suggestion about how they really differ from one another is that Angela Merkel has never, ever played out the feminist card, or even the feminine card, which Hillary has done at a certain time in order to reach out to her female audiences that then were not really reliable, and Angela Merkel has never done that. I think she is, well, that's first, one reason is that she was brought up in the GDR, political regime that said, well, women's question, solved it, you know, don't forget about it. It's no longer an issue. We've solved it, you know, don't talk about it. And she somehow, she incorporated that message and learned to, you know, be a whatever, a citizen, a physicist, whatever, without ever referring to her female sex. And that actually served her, or seems to serve her very well in the German populace, which is by no means any more inclined to vote a woman into office, but since it's not a real woman, it's some neuter. Well, no, I mean, I don't want to denigrate. It's a very smart move of her to not pose first as a woman and second, not pose as a feminist, because feminism really still does scare the shit out of people.
Yeah, and I think she's a kind of nearable. She's a warm person, and when I take a look, for me, it's a mother. Also, please don't laugh. But for me, she's no, you don't think so? For me, she's in a way a mother person. Yeah. And for me, Hillary Clinton is completely the difference. She's unnearable. She's far away from the people, and when I saw her in the television, she was in a way far away. I think there is a difference between the type Angela Merkel and Hillary Clinton, not in their competences maybe.
Okay, I'd like to invite questions. So yes, please, very fast. Yes, we have a question. Well, yeah, I think it'll help.
Thank you. Anyone in the panel? Just wondering the echo effect in social media. Sometimes we feel like you are preaching to the converted because the audience is just your own, people who agree with you. But in the decline of support for the SVP in Switzerland and maybe AfD in Germany, was there anything that transcended that echo that led to their weakening? And if there are any examples of how that was done?
Maybe I can tell you something about Switzerland and the SVP. In Switzerland, we run campaigns very traditional, And these billboards and inserts in the daily newspapers are the most important thing we spend budget on. But what was very, very interesting, we had also this Minaret initiative, and I think it was in the year 2012 or something like this, 2010, I don't know exactly. But there we could observe that the polls said that the people won't say yes to the initiative. But if you took a look in the social media on Facebook, which was new, very new there, I think it was before 2010, the discussion was a clearly yes to this initiative. And it's not representative, but it was it's a kind of feel. You can see what the people feel when there are these spirals of shouting in the social media. But at the moment in the campaigns, we work more with these classical instruments.
Thank you. Any other? Yes. Yeah. The gentleman in the second. Yes, please. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jasna Lazarevic from the Embassy of Switzerland.
Sorry.
I'm sorry to be a little bit of devil's advocate, but the arguments you just brought forward, saying why Hillary Clinton has lost, they do not really sound convincing because she won the popular vote by 3 million votes. So she could not have been so bad in mobilizing people and campaigning for them. If you could elaborate on that one, please.
Yes, that's a very good point. However, if you look at the projections on her victory, the Huffington Post was saying 3 days prior to the election that she was going to win with 98%. 538, which is a internet platform in the US for politics, received a shitstorm the weekend before the election because they only gave her a 75% chance. So if you look at the fact of how high her chances were supposed to be of winning, the result was a disaster. And I mean, yes, it's true, the majority of Americans were in favor of her. However, they were mostly, the fact that she won the majority of the popular vote was because she won such huge majorities on the coasts. And in states like Wisconsin, which used to be like by far a traditionally blue state, she lost. And that was a disaster for her because she didn't even make a single visit to Wisconsin because she just assumed that since labor unions are so strong in Wisconsin, she had that in her pocket anyways. So, and she lost many states. They had the term that she had a firewall in the Midwest. She told that firewall just didn't even crumble, it just fell down. And I think one problem was that she thought that she could rely on two traditional voter groups, like labor unions, like women, and she didn't have their support. So I think at the end of the day, although she did win a majority of the people's vote, the result was a disaster for her.
Thank you. Yes, Jen, you raise your hand.
Hi, so this is a hypothetical question. So it's 2019, Trump is up for re-election, and one of you are the opposition that's pitted against him. What would be your campaign slogan? What would be the language and emotions that you would be using?
If I can start on that, I think that's a great opportunity to throw in a fun fact. So you know that Donald Trump ran on Make America Great Again. You know what he did in mid-January of this year, even before he started as a president? He reserved the rights to keep America great again, that slogan. So, to everyone who thinks that he's just stumbling across with slogans and doesn't know what he's doing, I think it was, and don't get me wrong, but I want to say that in 2013, he reserved himself the rights to make America great again. So he might seem like a fool sometimes. He's not. He's great, and he knows his play. And as Mario Voigt, I think it was yesterday, as he was pointing out in a presentation, the same day that Donald Trump was tweeting about ripping apart a Boeing deal, he was actually sentenced to paying a fine concern in the Trump University case. So he knows how to play the media, he knows how to define the headlines of the day, and he knows what good slogans are. So I think for all his challengers in 2020, they should really start to, they got to play in his league somehow. I don't think that they have to cross as many red lines as he is crossing, but they better come up with a good slogan and brush up on their rhetoric, because he is very good in that game. And as a last thought, the big question will also be if he only faces an opponent from the Democratic Party, or if he's going to face a rival within his own party. So that's going to be very interesting.
But Astrid, did I get that right? He reserved the right to keep that slogan, but he can't do it twice, because that would... I'll keep America great again. Okay, because I thought, well, if he had just reiterated his old slogan, it would mean he didn't actually make it. Okay. Well, yeah, I really can't comment on this. It's definitely so that you have to have good slogans. German politicians are very, very bad in coming up with good slogans, although, I mean, you can just invent them and then market them. They now seem to go for male beauty. When I look at the election commercials by the Liberal Party that don't have any slogans anymore, but they just have a very handsome man posing as a dress man, and obviously, and I thought that would not go through, but obviously many people like that. You know, it's a good-looking guy. Once in a while, we need good-looking guys, and obviously it won't do him any harm. Let me just because I felt challenged by what Heike has just said, or what you were referring to as Angela Merkel's image as a motherly figure. Actually, as a historian again, I've gone back and asked myself, whoever in German politics after the Second World War, West German politics, has ever been addressed as a papa, as a daddy? That was in the very, very early years of kind of 1949, early 1950s, when the first federal president, Theodor Heuss, he was called Papa Heuss. And he was a grandfatherly figure, actually. He was in his, well, early 70s. He had lived through the Weimar Republic, had lived through the National Socialism, so he was wise, so to speak. He was old and wise. And that's why people called him Papa. Also because they thought, well, you know, with a papa or a grandfather, we're safe. Since then, none of the German chancellors or federal president have ever been addressed in these kind of father, mother, oh, well, no mother, anyway, but fatherly images. And once Angela Merkel comes up as a pretty young woman, I mean, how old was she? She was kind of, well, she's my age exactly, so I should know. In her 50s, without a family, everybody knows that, she doesn't have children. She had a, well, pretty successful career as a physicist before she joined politics. She started politics as Kohl's little girl, that's what she was called, and suddenly she's been elevated to the status of a mother. So what does that mean? My interpretation is that it's not because anybody thinks that she's a motherly figure. I mean, not her competitors in the CDU, whom she all elbowed away. Definitely not. But it's a strategy to kind of to come along with the first female, you know, kind of politician that really runs the country, and it's a way to not to demonize her, but to kind of make her cozy, to make her acceptable, to make her, you know, as a mother, nowadays you're no longer afraid of your mother. Your mother is your best friend. Your mother understands you. And so it's a way to harmonize citizens' relationships with their chancellor, with their female chancellor, rather than really kind of thinking that she is a motherly figure, which she definitely, I think, is not. I mean, she doesn't behave like a mother.
No. May I ask one question concerning...
But a little bit more self-confidence, I think, because the mother has also she's managing a lot of things, and I think it's not only a bad word to describe a person. I think just because she's a woman, huh? And I think trust is a very important thing to Angela Merkel. People trust there, and I think that's a strengthness. Yeah.
I mean, I like the contrast, right? There's this problem that women politicians feel. Is it because, I'm just throwing out hypothetically, that Clinton and to some extent Theresa May comes across as cold? I mean, you can be managerial, executive, but somehow Merkel managed to sort of adopt this mother figure. So how does a woman politician succeed? You know, in a man's world, you have to draw in women, men as well. Men are a bit easy because people are so used to men of different kinds, handsome, not so handsome, tall, fat, thin. But, you know, is there a certain magic formula for women politicians?
Well, she definitely does not succeed because she plays the emotional card, which we would, kind of traditionally think of women, that they are more emotionally attuned, that they're emotionally active, that they reach out to people's emotions, that they present themselves as understanding, trustworthy, etc. Interestingly, as we've heard, Donald Trump was much more efficient and much more versatile in playing this emotional card. So we should really kind of think about if this traditional divide between emotional women and rational men still succeeds. Although we also have to kind of always keep in mind that, as Astrid just said, it's not that he is emotional or that he is impulsive or that she is not emotional or not impulsive. They stage themselves as a particular personality. If they are this personality, nobody cares, except for the few of us who might still believe in something like authenticity. I mean, that's a big myth that people in politics can be authentic. Although I agree, there is a demand for authenticity, but only because it's so rare and it actually can't survive. It can't survive.
So concerning Clinton and Trump, I would actually go one step further and say that Clinton tried to play the female card, didn't really work for her, but Donald Trump clearly played the man's card. I mean, he was so sexist during the campaign. You all know the Access Hollywood tape where he made some very sexist comments about women. He has made some comments about wanting to date his daughter if Ivanka wasn't his daughter. So he was clearly installing himself as a man, whereas Hillary Clinton never made anything. I mean, for the longest time, she didn't even approach women and ask for their solidarity. I don't know what to make of that. I'm just raising the questions because it totally struck me. And concerning authenticity, I mean, Barack Obama managed to come across as very authentic. And he totally played the black card, if you forgive me calling it like that. And I think it's very interesting that in the US, it was possible to play the race card, like that he was able to gain the support of blacks, but that 8 years later, a woman wasn't able to get the solidarity of other women, although nowadays many complain about still not having had their first female president. And one other thought that I just have concerning Angela Merkel's success in Germany. You all know that picture of the G7 summit, I believe it was, in Bavaria a couple of years ago, where Merkel, as the only female world leader, was surrounded by male world leaders. Now we all know what happened to all of them at this point, right? They're all gone. And she's still there. And I sometimes wonder if maybe her successes also comes at the price of the of the other world leaders, because what I as a German appreciate is the continuity, that we don't have any populist parties that actually have a chance of success right now of gaining the chancellery. So I just wonder if maybe her installing herself as the constant voice of rationale in Germany contributes to her success. That's just a thought.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? If not, I'll just wrap up this session. It's been very thought-provoking. There is just one, okay, we talked about the importance of trust and, making connections. I still can't quite figure out the importance of personality, looks. You talk about authenticity, but then we also talk about, well, you need a pretty face, you need a certain kind of looks, but, how that matters. Is it a function of political culture as well? How well do you sell to a political electorate? So in any case, perhaps just before we close, would you, each of the panelists, give us your final thoughts? What you took away from it, what do you think is the most important thing to look out for in elections when you are talking about emotions and language? Can we start with you?
Okay. Yeah. Well, looks, neither Donald Trump, if I may say so, compared to his predecessor, nor Angela Merkel have the looks that would, qualify them to model. But I think what is more important to the electorate is the story that they tell about themselves, about their family, about their friends, about their upbringing, about their values, how these values have been formed. And Donald is obviously, is really playing this card, is tapping into the storytelling. Angela is not. We know very little about her. Now, it's interesting. During the last months or so, she's actually warmed up to the media's, or certain I don't say the media anymore, to certain media's request to open up and tell us if she cooks, or what kind of stuff she cooks, or what she likes about her husband, etc. And she gives she transmits these bits of information. She hasn't done it for 12 years, and she has still been successful. So I'm personally not really sure why she does it now. She could very well survive against her competitor without giving out these bits of personal information. And her husband does not, he doesn't figure, he has his own career, he accompanies her to Bayreuth, but apart from that, he's just, he's his own man, so to speak. And so she really doesn't give the populace a lot to chew on in terms of personality stories, which basically every other person, even Emmanuel Macron, does it. And if any of the, and I really like the Astrid's idea about, everybody else has gone from, the world stage. She survives. And of course, that has an effect on the German electorate. So there is this figure who, is stable and also promises stability. And she survives them all. At the same time, it's kind of, there is also, I think, especially when I watch what's going on in the far-right Christian conservative social party, there is a demand for, for stardom, for people like Herr von zu Guttenberg, might have forgotten about him, but a young talent within the CSU who first kind of rose like a star, and basically every media product kind of picked up his stories and his images, and that's very much like Macron in a way. And so there is this longing for a leader who is young, who is dynamic, who has a lot of stories to tell, who is also vain in a way, and who loves to talk about himself. There is something of this kind. And Angela Merkel is exactly the opposite. And I wonder what happens if one of these youngish guys will come up and challenge her, not from any other party, but from within her own party. What happens then? But we'll see in 4 years.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I was talking about policy campaigning and not about elections. I think that's very different. And in Switzerland, we have this so-called charismatic leader too. He's called Christoph Blocher. He has a lot of money, and he spent all this money in these campaigns I presented you today. And they are very, very professionals to deal with the power of language in political communications. I think language is steering the discourse in one or in the other direction, and it's important to test messages. Do people understand what you want to do? And we're talking about slogans. For me, slogans are just the tip of the iceberg in what we are calling political communication. I think that's very important, which I want to give you on your way. It's just the tip of the iceberg in the political communication. But in Switzerland we have so-called pre-campaigns, and there sometimes we tested if the so-called traditional media will get into these frames we prepared for the fight in the last 8 or 10 weeks before people decide. And so for me language is very important if you want, because it's steering the discourse for persons or for policy issues in one or another direction.
Thank you. Astrid.
I think in order to add to what you just said, I think that there are large national differences between what sort of language and what sort of emotions you need to cater to your constituents. I think it's also because the media landscape and the cultural landscape is very different even within just Germany and Switzerland. In the US, the media landscape is so partisan that they sometimes just take tiny bits of your slogans or of your political statements and turn them into push notifications. And I think also in the US it's a lot more about personality and charisma than it is in Germany. And that's actually a development that worries me sometimes, because when you look at everything that the candidates in both Republican and Democratic primaries have been through, who the hell is going to choose to run for president? Clearly not the smartest heads that are out there in the country. So finishing on that note, I'm very curious on who's going to be Donald Trump's challenger, both in his own party and from the opposite party in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. It's something to look forward to the next round of primaries. So thank you all to all my panelists. We've got a very interesting discussion going.